Get out of my house, you mean nothing now. The words didn't just echo. They stayed hanging in the air like something rotten no one wanted to touch. My name is Lydia Hartwell. I'm 42. Have you ever stood in a place that once felt like home, and realized you were only ever a guest? My brother, Daniel, didn't even wait for the last condolence call to end. The funeral flowers were still fresh on the table, white lilies Mom loved, and he was already flipping through documents like he'd been rehearsing this moment for years. I stood there, still dressed in black, fingers cold, clutching Mom's old silver hairpin. The same one she used every morning before opening the salon. It was slightly bent now, like it remembered her hands better than I did. Daniel smirked. Actually smirked. I inherited the salon. And the money. 68 million, he said, almost laughing. So let's not pretend you belong here anymore. I heard a chair creak behind me. It sounded like it was waiting for me to leave. I helped her build that place, I said quietly. He shrugged. You helped. I owned her trust. That word, owned, sat heavy. The house felt different. Empty, but not because Mom was gone. Because something colder had moved in. And in that silence I realized, grief doesn't always come from losing someone. Sometimes, it comes from discovering who was waiting for them to leave. The silence didn't break when I walked out, it followed me. I stepped onto the porch with nothing but my purse and that bent silver hairpin pressed into my palm. The door shut behind me with a soft click, too soft for something that felt so final. Inside I could still hear faint laughter. Not joy, just Daniel's voice, low and satisfied, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. The driveway looked longer than I remembered. The same cracked concrete Mom used to complain about fixing every summer. I used to promise I'd do it. I guess promises don't mean much when ownership changes. Lydia, a voice called from across the yard. Mrs. Calder from next door stood by her mailbox, her brows pulled together. You okay, sweetheart? I forced a small smile. Yeah, just heading out for a bit. She glanced toward the house, then back at me. Your mom always said that place wouldn't stand without you. I swallowed. Looks like she was wrong. But even as I said it, something didn't sit right. Because Mom wasn't careless with her words. Or her legacy. I got into my car, the engine humming low, almost hesitant. Like it didn't want to leave either. My phone buzzed just as I pulled away. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Miss Hartwell, a calm voice said. This is Attorney Klein. We need to discuss your mother's will. I glanced at the house in the rearview mirror. Daniel stood at the window now, watching me. I think, the lawyer added quietly, you may have left before hearing everything. My grip tightened on the wheel. Because something in his tone didn't sound like sympathy. It sounded like restraint. I was told everything, I said, my voice steady, even if my chest wasn't. A pause settled on the line. Not awkward, measured. Were you? Attorney Klein replied. The way he said it made my fingers tighten around the phone. I pulled the car over just past the corner, the house barely visible now. The engine idled, a low hum under the quiet tension building in my chest. Your brother presented you with the primary inheritance details, he continued. The salon, the liquid assets. Yes. But your mother's will isn't structured in a traditional way. I frowned. What does that mean? Another pause. Papers shifting softly in the background. Miss Hartwell, your mother added a conditional clause. One that requires both parties to be present for full disclosure. Both parties. My eyes flicked back to the rearview mirror, though the house was gone now. You mean Daniel has to be there too? Yes, Klein said calmly. And based on your early departure, I believe neither of you has heard the will in its entirety. A strange stillness settled over me. Not hope. Not yet. Just a quiet crack in everything I thought I understood. Come to my office, he added. Tomorrow morning. Bring your brother. I almost laughed at that. Daniel wouldn't come if he thought he'd already won. But then again, Daniel hated loose ends even more than he loved money. I'll be there, I said. As I ended the call, my gaze dropped to the silver hairpin in my hand. Bent, but not broken. Just like something Mom used to say when the salon had a bad month. The wind outside picked up slightly, brushing against the car windows like a whisper. And for the first time since I stepped out of that house, I didn't feel empty. I felt unfinished. The next morning smelled like rain, and something unsettled. I stood outside Attorney Klein's office, the silver hairpin tucked neatly into my coat pocket. My fingers kept brushing against it like it was reminding me to stay still, stay sharp. Daniel arrived 10 minutes late. Of course he did. His car door slammed louder than necessary, and when he walked toward me, he didn't even try to hide that same smug confidence. Fresh suit. Polished shoes. That familiar smirk resting on his face like it belonged there. "You actually came," he said, glancing at the building. "Still hoping for scraps?" I didn't answer. Some silences are louder than anything you can say. We walked in together, but not side by side. There was a gap between us, small but heavy. Like something invisible had already drawn a line. Inside, the office felt too quiet. Thick carpet. Soft ticking clock. Even the chairs looked like they were waiting for something to happen. The chair looked like it was waiting for me. I almost hesitated before sitting. Attorney Klein greeted us with a nod. Calm, controlled. The kind of man who didn't waste words. "Thank you for coming," he said, folding his hands. "Now, we'll proceed with the complete reading." Daniel leaned back casually. "Let's not drag this out. We already know how this ends." Klein didn't react. He simply opened the file. And began. "To my children, Daniel and Lydia, everything you think you know right now is only half the truth." Daniel's smirk flickered, just for a second. "And what comes next," Klein continued, his voice steady, "changes everything." Daniel let out a short mocking laugh. "This again?" Mom always loved her little dramatic lines. But his fingers, they weren't relaxed anymore. They tapped once against the armrest. Then stopped. Attorney Klein didn't look up as he continued reading. "The salon, Hartwell Beauty, will legally remain under Daniel's name." Daniel leaned back again, relief slipping back into his posture. "There it is." But Klein didn't pause. "Only under the condition that it remains fully operational, debt-free, and ethically managed for a period of 90 days following my passing." The room shifted. Not visibly, but I felt it. Like the air had tilted. Daniel frowned. "That's not a problem." Klein turned a page. "Any violation, financial, legal, or operational, within that period will result in immediate transfer of ownership to Lydia." Silence. Not the soft kind. The kind that presses against your ears. Daniel sat forward slowly. "That's vague. What counts as a violation?" Klein finally looked up. "Misreporting income. Cutting employee wages without cause. Breach of existing vendor contracts. Or," he paused slightly, "any attempt to liquidate assets prematurely." Daniel's jaw tightened. As I knew that look. He'd already started. I didn't say a word. I just reached into my pocket and felt the cool curve of Mom's silver hairpin. Bent, but holding. Klein continued, his voice calm, almost distant now. "And as for the monetary assets, the $68 million will not be accessible until the completion of the same 90-day period." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" "Until then," Klein read, "all financial movements tied to my estate will be monitored under legal review." The smirk was gone now. Completely gone. And for the first time, Daniel didn't look like the man who had won. He looked like someone who had already made a mistake. The drive back to the salon felt different. The sky was low, gray, and heavy, like it knew what was coming. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't even glance at me. The silence between us was sharp, almost audible, slicing through the hum of the tires on asphalt. Inside the salon, I watched him like a shadow. Employees greeted him politely, but there was tension in every nod, every forced smile. They knew something had changed, even if they didn't know what. Daniel started inspecting the books immediately, flipping pages too quickly, ignoring the small details. I noticed the invoices stacked incorrectly, the employee schedules mismatched, the equipment overdue for servicing. I didn't touch a thing. I just watched. Hours passed. And Daniel grew frustrated. His hands shook slightly when he tried to sign off payments, when he realized clients were being double billed, and when the software wouldn't accept an unauthorized transfer. The room smelled faintly of hairspray and bleach. A familiar scent Mom used to say meant life was still happening. By evening, Daniel slammed the ledger shut, smacking it hard against the counter. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "I don't understand," he shouted. "This is all wrong." I walked past him silently, the silver hairpin in my hand glinting under the fluorescent lights. And then I realized, sometimes the quietest presence holds the loudest power. By the third week, the cracks in Daniel's control were impossible to ignore. Employees whispered behind closed doors. Vendors called with complaints. Clients canceled appointments. The salon that once hummed with life now felt fragile, almost haunted. Daniel tried to mask panic with aggression. He barked at staff, demanded rushed deliveries, and spent hours glaring at spreadsheets like they had personally betrayed him. But the damage was done. Every mistake he made, every corner he cut was legally recorded. Moms were watching, silent, patient. I stayed on the sidelines. Quiet. Observing. Touching the silver hairpin in my pocket like it was a talisman. I didn't need to intervene. Mom's plan was precise, surgical. One afternoon, Daniel stormed into the back office, slamming the door so hard the frames on the wall rattled. "I've done everything right," he shouted. "Why is this failing? Why won't it just work?" I leaned against the counter, arms folded, calm as the storm around him. "Maybe you're not as clever as you think," I said softly. He froze, eyes narrowing. "You wanted everything your way," I continued, my voice low, steady. "Mom gave you the keys, but she knew you wouldn't respect them." Daniel's face twisted. Bigger. Confusion. Fear. A cocktail he had never tasted before. And as he realized he had lost control, I smiled ever so slightly. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't roar. It waits, silent, until the perfect moment to strike. The morning of the 90-day mark arrived quietly. Sunlight poured through the salon windows, catching dust motes in its golden rays. Everything seemed normal. Almost peaceful. Daniel arrived first, confident as ever. But the confidence faltered as Klein's assistant arrived behind him, carrying folders thick with reports, invoices, and logs. Each page meticulously documented. Every misstep, every corner cut, every unethical decision Daniel had made since Mom's passing. Klein entered shortly after, calm, almost invisible, like a shadow that waits for the right instant. "Daniel Hartwell," he said, voice precise. "According to the conditions of your mother's will, ownership of Hartwell Beauty and the accompanying financial assets are now legally transferred to Lydia Hartwell." Time froze. The words didn't just hit Daniel, they sank. His smirk, the arrogance, the mocking tone from the day he threw me out, all vanished in a blink. I stepped forward slowly, silver hairpin glinting under the light, a small emblem of Mom's presence, her wisdom, her foresight. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I just held the calm clarity that comes from knowing justice had been served, perfectly, silently. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. He had nothing left, not money, not power, not the smug satisfaction he had worn like armor. I walked past him, touching the counter gently, feeling the salon's pulse, the life Mom had built, preserved. Outside, the wind carried a faint scent of lilies. A reminder of loss, love, and the quiet strength of those who wait, watch, and act with patience. I smiled once. Bent, but unbroken.